Hello everyone, and welcome to Sogeti's 2017 DevOps Hackathon. So today we will be talking about creating a simple DevOps pipeline using AWS, and we will be creating this pipeline using AWS S3, Ghost Inspector, BlazeMeter, CodeDeploy, and EC2. I am Namrata Shah, and I am the National Solutions Architect for DevOps. I have been with Sogeti for about 9+ years. I'm a senior manager, and I work in both technical and non-technical space. I have been an engineer for about 15+ years, and my core experience has been on Microsoft technologies. I used to be an MVP in C#.NET, and I used to be the virtual technology specialist for BizStack. And that's my email and my LinkedIn profile URL at the bottom. So for today's pipeline, I have kind of enlisted a couple of key steps over here. So typically what we will be doing is we will be using S3 as our source code repository, and we will be uploading our application as a zip file to S3, and then we will be using EC2 instances with appropriate IAM roles to deploy our application in both dev and prod environments. And our development will be done using EC2. And this is going to be a simple HTML app, so we do not need to perform any builds, but we will certainly need to install and enable Internet Services or IIS on our EC2 instances. And once we have our application pulled out from S3 and downloaded from S3, we will be performing deployment on our dev EC2 instance. After that, we will be performing certain basic UI testing using Ghost Inspector, and we will also perform load testing using BlazeMeter. And finally, after receiving approval, we will deploy our code to our production EC2 instance. Now, these are the steps at a very high level, but what we will do now is we will look at all of these individual services and components, and then finally look at our pipeline. So let me switch to the Amazon console over here. So this is my Amazon console, as you see, and this is my pipeline. The name of the pipeline is pipeline 1, and as you see over here, as we just talked about our key steps, our source code is going to come from Amazon S3. That's our code repository. Our deployment in the dev or the beta environment is going to be done using AWS CodeDeploy. We will be doing some basic unit testing, UI unit testing using Ghost Inspector, performing some load testing using BlazeMeter, and as well as after a pre-approval is done, doing a production deployment. Now let's look at the configurations of each of these AWS components. So let's first start with AWS S3. So AWS S3 hosts our current source code repository as a zip file. Now our bucket name over here in S3 is demo bucket 2017, and as you see, we have a single zip file over here, and if I click on this zip file, it will show me all its details, and it will also show me the link to this particular zip file in our S3 bucket. Now you can essentially even download the zip file from here and make any changes, or if you have the source code on your box, which is the case with me, you can essentially make changes to the source code and have them uploaded over here or to the S3 bucket, and it will create a new version, and every time a new version is uploaded, it will trigger our pipeline. So we will look into the details of our source code shortly, but before we go there, we will let's look at our EC2 instances and our code deploy configurations. So going to our EC2 instances. So for this particular demo, we are going to use two EC2 instances, and both of these instances have a name value pair or tags, essentially, as you say, called as DevOps Demo 2017 and DevOps Demo 2017 Prod. Now these are the two core instances. The first one is the dev instance, and the second one, as the name suggests, is a prod instance. Now both of these instances are Windows Server 2012 R2 instances. As you see, this is the AMI ID associated, and they have their individual security groups associated. But since this is a web app, we have enabled port 80 and port 3389 on these boxes, and this is true for both dev and prod boxes. And for both of these boxes, again, we are using the same IAM role. The name of our role is called as the instance role, and this role is associated with both dev and prod boxes. So let's go and look at the policies associated with this role. So as you see over here, this particular role has three core policies: Amazon EC2 full access, S3 full access, and CodeDeploy full access. And that is because we are picking up our source code from S3. We are deploying on EC2 using CodeDeploy. And over here, I'm using the same instance type, the instance role, sorry, for both the dev and prod. But if you want, you can create separate instance or IAM roles and associate to your instance, depending upon the policies and the privileges that you would like to assign to your EC2 instances. But for this demo, I'm going to use the same instance role for both our dev and prod EC2 instances. Now, since these EC2 instances are created from scratch, and we are using CodeDeploy to perform our deployment, one of the key things that we certainly need to keep in mind is to ensure that CodeDeploy is installed and deployed on these instances, as well as the IIS services are installed and are enabled on these two boxes. Now let's connect to one of these boxes, and we will RDP into this box. Remember, the two ports that we opened up was port 80 and port 3389, which is used for RDP. Now to download this remote desktop file, I will need to get the password, and I'm going to use my my pen file to do that. So this is my PEM file over here, and I'm going to decrypt it to create the password, and then I'm going to download the remote desktop file, open it, and try and connect to this particular box. Now, as you see, this is our EC2 instance, and over here we have IIS and CodeDeploy already installed. Now we will shortly go and see if the services are running. So this is a PowerShell command prompt, and we will be using certain PowerShell commands to know the service of CodeDeploy agent on this particular box. So as you see, our CodeDeploy agent is already learning. Now I had already installed the CodeDeploy agent and IIS on this box, but if you want to go ahead and do that installation by yourself, these are the various steps over here. So let me walk you through the steps. So the first thing that you would need is an AWS user. So as you see, this is my username Nasha 28, and I have copied my access key and my secret access key over here. Now, one of the first things that you want to do is to create your AWS credential profile over there on your EC2 instance, and for that you will be using your access key and your secret access key, and then this profile will be created and stored on your EC2 instance. So all that you need to do is essentially copy this statement and paste it on your PowerShell command. And then to install and start CodeDeploy agent, you would first need to kind of give your profile access to East USA region. So here what I'm doing is, for my profile, I'm making East USA 1 as the default region. Then you would need to can give read access to S3 object, basically to download the CodeDeploy agent MSI. And you would be downloading this CodeDeploy agent MSI and storing on c:temp folder. And after that, this particular line essentially does is that it installs or executes the MSI in a quiet mode and basically logs everything into this host agent install log. And finally, the last command over here is the get-service -name CodeDeploy agent. That is essentially to check if the agent has been deployed and if it has been started or not. So we just saw that the agent was running, and so we are good to go. If you want to know and look into the details of CodeDeploy, because every step when you're performing your installation, CodeDeploy is going to go and log that information in CodeDeploy logs. And CodeDeploy logs are typically located under Program Data, Amazon CodeDeploy, and you should be able to see all your logs over there. So let's move further ahead. So these were the core things for our EC2 instances. So the next one would be our CodeDeploy service that we have over here. Now we have created an application called as demo app, which is going to be used for this demo. And for this app, we have created two deployment groups, one for dev and one for prod. So let's look at the configuration of these deployment groups. Now, as you see, this is an in-place deployment. That essentially means that we will be installing this application on a specific EC2 instance, and every time we perform an installation, it will be installed on the same EC2 instance. And we have provided a key value pair over here. The key essentially is name and the value is DevOps Demo 2017. And as you see, there is one single instance which has this key value pair associated to it, and that is our dev instance. And this instance is currently running. The deployment configuration is going to be one at a time. That essentially means that the deployment is going to happen in a sequential manner, one instance at a time. Now, although for this demo we have only a single instance, but let's say if you had multiple instances, then the deployment would have been done one instance at a time. And the success criteria is that if all instances, all but the last instance succeeds, and it fails after any instance except the last instance fails. And this is probably one of the simplest deployment configuration that AWS offers. Along with that, you will see that we have also associated a service role, just like how we had associated an IAM role with our EC2 instances. We have associated an IAM role with this particular deployment group. As you see, the name of the role is dev deploy role, and we will be using this role to deploy for both dev and prod. Now you can again create separate roles for dev and prod, but for this demo we will be using the same deployment configuration and the same deployment role as well, the service role associated. Now let's look at the prod configuration, and our prod configuration is on the same lines as our dev configuration, except for one key difference, which is the key value pair associated. As you see over here, the key value pair is DevOps Demo 2017 prod, because this is a prod environment, and we have one instance which is associated with this particular key value pair, or has the name as DevOps Demo 2017 prod. And again, as you see, the instance is running, the code deployment configuration is one at a time, and it's the same role that we had associated with our dev deployment group that is associated over here with our prod deployment group as well, that is dev deploy role. So now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration for our dev deploy role under IAM. So we looked at the instance role which was associated with the EC2, and the dev deploy role is the role which is associated with our deployment groups. And as you see, just like the IAM role associated with EC2, this particular role also has full access for EC2, S3 and CodeDeploy, because we will be deploying on EC2 instances using CodeDeploy and pulling a source code out from S3. So let's look at our S3 bucket again over here. So this is a demo bucket, and as we see, this is a zip file, and I have the zip file downloaded on my current laptop, or my current working folder. So let's go over there. So this is the zip file that we have, and as you see, it has 3 core files over here. One is the index.html, one is the install bad, and one is the YAML file. So let's look at index.html. As you see, this is a simple file. It has a title DevOps Demo 2017, same as the header, and it has just one line over here that you have successfully created your pipeline using retrieving your application from Amazon S3 and deploying on EC2 instances using AWS CodeDeploy. And it has a font color of white and a background color of red. So let's quickly execute or basically load our HTML in one of the browsers. So this is what you see. This file is currently locally on my box. As you see, it is in my C colon. Okay, and this is the version which is also currently deployed on our EC2 instances. So for example, if I go here and I go to inet pub www root, you will see that there is an index.html that is there over here, and this is currently deployed over here as well, physically on our EC2 instance. We can also access the same URL from our browser. So let's go to that particular EC2 box. Let me quickly grab the URL for that EC2 box. And this is the server, and this is a URL. This is the public DNS. So let's go, and as you see, this is accessible over port 80. And that's another thing that you need to keep in mind is to ensure that you enable port 80 and port 3389 on your boxes, so that you can do RDP and you can also access your application over port 80 over the web. So coming back to our S3 over here and our source code. So this is our source code, and what we are going to do now is we will be making some basic changes to this particular file. So let's change the background color of this particular file from red to pink. So, so this is the live one, so I'm going to go to the local one. So this is the local one. As you see, it has the URL c:users, and if I refresh this, there you go, the color changed. The color changed from red to a pinkish color. And now what we are going to do is that we are going to upload our changes as a zip file. That's basically uploading our source code as a zip on S3, and moment we do that, it will trigger the pipeline. Okay, so let's bundle this up and let's create a zip file. So it has created the zip, and I am going to rename this zip as the zip that is there on my this is the zip file. So we made our source code changes, we bundled it up, and our zip file is ready. So now let's upload this zip file on to our S3 bucket. Okay, so this is the bucket, and we can basically upload a new version. So come over here, add files, it's under downloads. This is a zip file, and next, and it's going to upload. So as you see, it's uploaded my zip file over here. Now since our zip file got uploaded, it should trigger our pipeline 1 over here. So let's wait for this, and you will see that our pipeline has been triggered. There you go, it's turned blue, and now it is showing to us that it is in progress. So what is going to happen over here is that it is going to go to Amazon S3. It is going to go and fetch our application as a zip file, and then it is going to go ahead and deploy our application on our dev EC2 instance, and then it is going to perform some basic UI testing against it and some load testing against it, and then finally wait for approval. And then once we provide approval, we will be deploying that to our production environment. So as you see, currently our deployment is going on our beta or on our dev environment over here. So this should complete shortly. Just give it some more time. So there it, I think, is completed. And as you see, if you click on the details, it shows you that the deployment has succeeded, so which is good essentially. So one of the things that we will do is, if you click over here on code deploy, it will show you that our dev environment, it has succeeded. Okay, so let's go and look at, this is our dev environment URL. So let's go and see, and as you see, our application is deployed and the background color has changed from red to pink. So let's go back to our pipeline, and now the next stage, the next step is basically being executed, wherein we are performing our unit test using Ghost Inspector. So let's go and take a look at the unit test that we are performing right now. So if we click on Ghost Inspector, it will take us to this particular URL, and the test that we are performing is DevOps demo test. And as you see, there are some previous executions, but currently this test is being executed. So under the DevOps demo test, there is one single test, which is the page load test. And as you see there, what we are doing as a part of this test is that we are going to our dev server URL, that is the same URL where we have deployed our application, and we are basically looking for text called as DevOps demo 2017 and another text which kind of states that you have successfully created your pipeline and deployed it on your EC2 instances. So these are the only two assertions that we have. It is a fairly simple test, but it is decent enough to kind of demo essentially as to how to go about using Ghost Inspector. Now if you want to create additional or more complex tests, feel free to do that, but for this demo, all that we are doing is we are going to this URL and we are looking for some very specific information. So let's see if our test succeeded. As you see, our Ghost Inspector UI tests have succeeded, and now we are basically doing load testing using BlazeMeter. Now, so this will take a while. This takes about 6 minutes for the test that we have created. So let's go ahead and look at the test that we have. Again, it is a very simple test that we are creating. The name of the test is DevOps demo test over here, as you see, and it showed us that it is it just recently started. And let's look at the test configuration. So this is the original test configuration. If you see, we have one very specific scenario wherein we are performing load testing by having 5 users. The overall test duration is 2 minutes, and since we are having 5 users, we will be using 5 tests. We will be doing this over about 101 iterations. The ramp up time is about 56 seconds. The total test duration is 2 minutes, and the delay between the requests is about 240 milliseconds. And now also let's go and look at a failure criteria. So what we have done over here is we have created 2 failure criteria. First is that the average response time should be should not be greater than 100 milliseconds, and the number of errors should not be more than 100. So what this essentially means is that if the average response time is about 100 milliseconds, then we will consider this test to fail. And if there are more than 0 errors, that means even if there's a single error, then we will consider this test to fail. And this is a simple HTTP test that we have created. You can potentially create many complex tests using JMeter or even Jenkins, etc. But this was a simple URL HTTP test that we have created using BlazeMeter, essentially because BlazeMeter kind of provides a direct integration into AWS, and so does Ghost Inspector as well. Now, as you see, the ETA is anytime now, so our test should complete shortly. Let me refresh and see if they have completed. Probably not. So it's still continuing at this time. So let's just wait for a little bit, And as you see over here, okay, so again now it's completed. I refreshed the page, so it took about roughly about a little more than 2 minutes, I would say, but that's okay. And it typically sends out reports, so let's see the reports. As you see, these are all the previous reports that you see, and the summaries on the right hand side over here. So let's go back to our AWS pipeline, and as you see, it's still showing that it's in progress, but if you click on the details, it will show you all of these details and basically take you to the report page on BlazeMeter. And as you see, our test over here has succeeded. The average response time was about 57.56 milliseconds, and it was probably 90% of the time it was about 58 milliseconds, and we do not have any errors. So both of our failure criteria have been met, so this test has been successful. So let's go back and wait. Now as you see, the status has changed here. It shows succeeded, and now it is waiting for our pre-approval. So I'm going to give a pre-approval over here, but before I do that, let's do one thing real quick. Our AWS CodeDeploy, now remember that this is our dev environment, okay, and this is the local version over there. But what we are going to do is, let's go and look at our prod environment. Okay, so prod environment, let's go directly to the EC2 instance. On prod, this is our prod EC2 instance, and this is the URL. So let's open a new tab and load this and see. So as you see, there is an older version of our application which has the red background currently installed on our production environment. But once we give the approval and the installation happens on a production environment, this will be reinstalled and we will refresh this page to see a pink color background. So let's go back over here and let's provide an approval. So say, and we are providing the approval to go ahead and do the deployment on our production environment. So shortly we will see that our prod deployment stage will be initiated, and eventually our application will be deployed on the prod environment. So let's just wait. It's turned blue, so hopefully it should refresh in a little bit and show that it is in progress. There it is. It changed in progress. So shortly our application would be installed on a production EC2 instance. So we'll just wait for a little bit for the installation to complete. As you see, installation is probably complete, and there's this details hyperlink that has come. So let's go and look at the details of our installation. As you see, the deployment succeeded, so which is great news for us. So our application has been deployed in prod. So now this is the URL of our prod environment. If we refresh this, we should see that the background should be changed from red to pink. So let's do that. So I refresh the page, and as you see, the background color has changed from red to pink, and our pipeline has executed completely. As you see, all the stages of our pipeline have executed successfully. Now let's go and look at some configurations, since now you understand what we are doing as a part of this pipeline. So this is looking at the whole pipeline in an edit mode. So as you see over here, we have several stages, and you can actually edit at each stage. So if we click over here on edit, it will give you this pop-up over here showing what you want to do. And we are essentially telling that what the action category over here is, that this is it is source, and our source provider is Amazon S3. As you see, there are other providers as well, like AWS Code Commit, GitHub, but for this demo we are using Amazon S3. This is our location of our Amazon bucket, S3 bucket, and where our zip file is over here. Remember the zip file that we uploaded to get this pipeline triggered? That this location belongs to that particular zip file. And the final artifact is basically my app, that's the application that is going to be an output that we have to provide over here. And it is very important to ensure that you remember the name of this output, because going forward in the rest of the other stages, you want to ensure that you are picking up the same output artifact that you got from S3 and deploying in your dev and your production environments. Let's look at the next stage. The next stage we have is the beta stage or the dev stage, wherein we are doing deployment on our dev EC2 instance. So let's edit and look at the configuration settings. So as you see over here, the action name, the action category, unlike the previous one over here, is deploy. Why? Because we are performing a deployment, and we have given this an action name called as DevOps group. And the deployment provider, in this case, since we did all our deployments using CodeDeploy, we have selected AWS CodeDeploy as the provider. But you see there are other providers like CloudFormation, Elastic Beanstalk, OpsWork. But for this demo, we are going to use CodeDeploy. The application name is a demo app. This is the same application name that we created earlier and along with that we created our deployment groups. And since this is deployment in dev, we are going to associate the demo deployment dev deployment group for this particular deployment on our EC2 instance. And as we stated earlier, the output artifact of our S3 becomes the input artifact over here, and that is nothing else but our application, my app. And this kind of completes the configuration of our AWS CodeDeploy for our dev environment. The next thing that we are doing over here is doing basically some unit tests using Ghost Inspector. So now let's look at its configuration settings. As you see over here, the action category is test, because we are performing testing. We have given an action name called as unit UI test, and the test provider that we are using is Ghost Inspector. Now, if you click on this drop down, you will see that there are a bunch of other providers, and as you see, there are a bunch of other custom providers as well. As you see, I have some others, but which we are not using for this demo, but you can still see them in the listing over there. But you can still use CodeBuild, BlazeMeter, Load Test, Epica, Jenkins, probably RunScope, etc. But for this particular, since we are doing Ghost Inspector UI testing, we are using Ghost Inspector to do and perform some basic tests. Now this is where you want to perform connection with your Ghost Inspector. So if I clicked over here on reconnect, it is going to take me to the Ghost Inspector website, and it is going to ask me either to integrate with the entire test suite or any specific integration test. Now as you see, it is our original test, DevOps demo test, and the test suite, and which contains a single test page load. So what we are going to do is we are going to integrate over here with the entire suite, and if we do that, that test ID will be captured over here, and this particular test suite will be executed every time a pipeline is executed. And again, what are these tests going to be executed against? What is the input artifact? The input artifact is my app, wherein which is essentially nothing else but the application that is deployed on our EC2 instance, and the application that we got the source code out of S3. So let's update this and let's move on to the next step. In the next step, we are performing load testing using BlazeMeter. So let's look at its configuration. Again, the action category is going to be test, and here the test provider instead of Ghost Inspector is BlazeMeter, and that's because we are planning to do some load testing using BlazeMeter over here. It works on the same lines. Basically, you can create your test in BlazeMeter and then use the recreate button or the link over there and connect to your tests over here. So as you see, we have DevOps demo test, and I can select this test basically by clicking connect button over here, and this particular test will be connected with this particular stage of our pipeline. You can see the test ID over here, and every time a pipeline executes, this particular test will be executed. And again, the input artifact is my app, just like Ghost Inspector. Here in the next stage, we are seeking some pre-approval, so it's fairly straightforward. You want to change the action category over here to approval. The type of approval is manual approval, and that's by far what is currently supported by AWS. And that's pretty much it. And every time your pipeline runs, after executing all the steps earlier, that is fetching data from S3, deploying it on dev, performing UI testing using Ghost Inspector, and performing load testing using BlazeMeter, it will come to this particular stage of the pipeline and wait over there for you to provide approval. Only if the approval is provided, it will go further ahead with deployment to prod. So let's look at the last stage of our pipeline, which is the prod deployment. And as you see over here, again, the action category is deploy, and just like how we did in dev environment, we are going to use CodeDeploy to perform deployment in our production environment as well. And again, we are using demo app, but our deployment group is different. Our deployment group is demo, deployment, prod. Remember, we created two separate deployment groups, one for dev and one for prod. Since this is deployment in the prod environment, we are using the prod deployment group. And again, the input artifact over here is my app. So this kind of completes the entire walkthrough of my pipeline. And as you see, we kind of walk through all the stages. We kind of executed the pipeline. We went through the entire configuration, and essentially this should help you to understand as to how AWS pipelines typically work. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the presentation, and you liked my presentation today, and this is helpful to you. Please feel free to provide your feedback on our YouTube website, and we will talk to you sometime later on some other presentations. Thank you guys, and have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.